the Orange Zone, sponsored by Apex Entertainment.
What's up, everyone? Welcome in to the Orange Zone podcast. We are joining you after Syracuse upset Clemson. Unbelievable game. First time that Syracuse has ever won in Death Valley. A 34-21 upset after betting odds in Vegas said that Syracuse was a 17.5-point underdog. How are we feeling, Ashley?
Yeah, Syracuse, like you said, it first ever win in Death Valley. Hard to believe. Just third win over Clemson all time. Fran Brown was on a mission, and he achieved that today in Clemson, South Carolina. What a game this was. To say that there was some weird instances in this game. Obviously, we're going to touch on Steve Angeli. Unfortunate situation there. The weather delay, delays things for three. I mean, this game wrapped up at 5:30. It was a noon game. So a lot to unpack, but Syracuse football now has really its signature win of the year already. Fran Brown's second signature win after the Miami game last year. He got it in year 1 in game 12, gets it in year 2 in game 4.
Yeah, weird, quirky, but end of the day, a win is a win. Be sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. I should mention this podcast is sponsored by Apex Entertainment. A couple things we want to go through here, but I think that you have to at least mention one bad thing first to get it out of the way. This would have been an awesome game that left you with an awesome feeling if and only if QB1 Steve Angeli hadn't gone down.
Yeah.
But he did, and there are some question marks about that now.
Yeah, we have to address the Angeli issue. Obviously, goes down in the third quarter. It was a non-contact situation. He was kind of like rolling out to his right, looking for a receiver. I mean, I am not a doctor. We do not have any official word yet. The replay did not look good with his knee. It really looked like something popped there. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is Achilles. He had a situation in the first quarter where he kind of tweaked it. He was fine. We saw him come out of halftime with the brace on it. And then in the third quarter, he was not able to return. He looked like he was in significant pain. I mean, he was kind of slamming his helmet, came back eventually on the sideline in crutches, and teammates were kind of consoling him, hugging him. Rickie Collins finished out the game, which we'll get into, but certainly I would say a high level of concern about Steve Angeli.
No doubt about it. He was on crutches. He couldn't put weight on it. He didn't come back in the game, and his teammates are hugging him. As far as I'm concerned, teammates hugging him fine, but the other three, not great signs. So I guess we'll see ultimately what happens there. But what hurts more is that before he was out of this game, he was doing a great job.
Yeah.
Completed 18 of 31 passes for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had this offense completely and utterly under control.
Yeah, I guess it's too soon before we have official word to, completely declare to host a Steve Angeli funeral of sorts for this season. But how absolutely unfortunate this injury is either way, right? No matter how long he's out, you really felt like he finally put it all together today. Obviously, he did against Colgate, but that's a team like Colgate. You felt like he was comfortable, the leader of this offense, and was facilitating a really up-tempo, fast-paced, dominant offense. I mean, in the first half, Jeff Nixon was calling the game of his life. Syracuse could do no wrong.
100%. Jeff Nixon, remarkable day. Have to give some flowers where they're due.
Great day for Jeff.
Yeah, really great day for Jeff. Beyond Angeli, which we'll talk about more as we go through this, have to give some credit to Rickie Collins too. Comes in off the bench, which I understand is the role of any backup quarterback, but it's a tough spot to be put in. He completed 3 of 8 passes for 34 yards and 1 touchdown. That touchdown came almost immediately after he was put into the game. There have been times where we've seen him come out and look a little scattered. He too looked calm, poised, and ultimately Fran Brown has said since the beginning of the year, this is why we did it this way. We've been planning for this. And he said that in the instance that Angeli went down, they felt confident in their backup. That matters.
I mean, we've been talking about it for months. Certainly everybody's happy that you have both of them right now. So we'll see what happens with Collins and if he does become the guy or the length and extent of Angeli's injury. But it was at least good to see him come in cold off the bench and find Justin Ross Simmons for that touchdown. That injected some life into everyone. Obviously, the offense did not look as good in the second half as it did in the first, but there were adjustments that needed to be made there, and you didn't need the points, right? The second half was really about keeping Clemson off the board.
I totally agree. Let's get into it. To start this game, Yasin Willis gets into Clemson territory on the first drive. It is a 32-yard run. Again, Angeli went down for a minute, but once he popped back up, all of a sudden Syracuse has its first lead of the game, and it was off to a good start from there, I'd say.
Yeah, the minute Willis broke away on that first drive, that was a deep, dominant run. That was the first sign of trouble for Clemson. Angeli then found Justice Ross Simmons at the end of that drive for really a highlight reel catch. I mean, we are seeing Justice Ross Simmons and Daryl Gill got moss last week, make some astounding catches week in and week out here. He climbed the ladder over the Clemson defender. So they were off to a good start, and then Fran Brown decided that he had a few tricks up his sleeve. Trick or treat.
Might you call him Justice Moss Simmons?
I like that. Justice Moss Simmons.
I found that on Twitter, but isn't that great?
Yes, it is.
I'm like, oh my God, that's so smart.
It is
okay.
good.
Then anyway, in any case, Fran Brown goes for the onside freaking kick. Bold.
We were 4 minutes into the game. The guts it takes to call a surprise onside kick there. It certainly surprised everybody. It absolutely worked perfectly, right? They're not allowed to touch the ball until the 45-yard line. Syracuse touched it at the perfect point. Fran Brown, I just know they were practicing that all week. I'm going to need to hear the post-game press conference. Somebody give me information on the onside kick because I know that Fran Brown was cooking that up since Tuesday.
Yeah, please ask about it. You know how he always refers to the first day that they're practicing for a game as the first quarter? He's been practicing that since the damn first quarter. He's ready for that. But again, I think that if you're going to go into a place like Death Valley, you want to do something that you've never done before, you need to make some changes and do some things that other people would be too afraid to do. That's that.
That was the moment in this game where you knew that Fran Brown was absolutely not messing around. And I'm just going to say it, special teams was such an area of disaster for Syracuse last year, even with the 10-3 season. Very refreshing to see special teams execute.
Dude, there was a 55-yard field goal or something like that.
Yeah.
Crazy. So great job there by Fran Brown and company. Then Will Nixon gets in to start the second half. So at this point, 17-7, which is why Ashley was saying earlier, Jeff Nixon was really having a day.
Yeah. That was when you started to hear things on the broadcast. I actually thought the ESPN broadcast did a good job today with this game. It was so lengthy that it ended up being moved over to ESPN2. But this is where the announcers are saying things like, I have been to Death Valley many times. This is as quiet as I've ever heard it. Jeff Nixon, the offensive coordinator for Syracuse, if you're him, you can't be doing any better than this. And he couldn't be, right? It's midway through the second quarter. Syracuse is up over 200 yards of total offense. They're doing whatever they want, essentially, to the Clemson defense. They are getting in on the ground. Will Nixon went into the end zone there when he made it 17-7, untouched, wide open lane in front of him. No one even in his vicinity.
So at that point, right, 10-point lead, you're feeling comfortable, surprised, impressed. You're seeing that Clemson fans are starting to feel a bit bamboozled.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yes, that's right. Then, two roughing the passer calls is followed by a deep shot to Daryl Gill. It results in a 22-yard touchdown. There was really nobody even around him. It was still a great catch. It was slightly overthrown. It's 24-7 Syracuse. What are you mentally feeling at this point? Maybe not even as a broadcaster, but as an SU grad.
24-7 was the moment where you're kind of I can't believe my own eyes. We discussed how Clemson was coming into this game on a low note. 1-2, had only beaten Troy, but 24-7, if you told me that you had a dream that things went that well in the first half, you're lying. Even your dream wasn't 24-7.
I think it's important that everyone knows that James Mungro texted me today minutes before the game started and said Syracuse isn't going to win this game.
James.
Yep.
I didn't think it was going that way.
But I think it's important for me to say this so that when he comes on the podcast inevitably next week and he's like, oh, I knew they were going to win, we all know that that's just not true. He said they were going to lose, okay?
That's disappointing.
I know, of all the times, right? We're going to have to mess with him a little bit about that. But yeah, he thought it. I think we both thought it, even if we thought they would cover the spread. I did not anticipate this.
I thought Syracuse was going to cover and it was going to be close. I was pretty confident in saying that a 17.5-point spread was far too wide of a margin. But who could have anticipated this?
Clemson scores before the half to make it 24-14. SU defense almost held at the goal line. There was a costly taunting penalty by Brahim Long on third down. Fran Brown let him hear it.
Yeah, if Syracuse would have somehow collapsed to lose this game, I think that would have been a critical moment that you would have looked at. You don't want to get called for taunting when you're about to hold in the red zone at the goal line for taunting. Fran Brown was not happy.
But I think the point is those sorts of things and even discipline mistakes are happening very infrequently at this point, and when they do, there's problems.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yep.
It's a different culture than it was under Dino in that way, I feel. Like the penalties that are costly that could have been avoided, you're not seeing so many of those with Fran Brown. And I have to say, like, if I tuned into, like you said earlier, Clemson sports talk right now, I really seriously wonder if they're talking about just the amount of times that the Tigers shot themselves in their own foot. Like the amount of just, holding or roughing the passer.
Yeah.
It was like penalty after penalty, it felt like.
Well, yeah, I mean, Angeli, before he came out in the second quarter, was getting rocked there for a few plays. There was like 2 roughing the passer calls in a row. Syracuse had a couple penalties, right? There was like a pass interference in there, a couple of false starts. Obviously, that one I mentioned by Long, that was unfortunate. But as a whole, you were seeing Clemson's come in spots that were hurting them deeply. I mean, Clemson looked like an undisciplined football team.
Yes. One of those roughing the passer calls was questionable. I'm brave enough to admit that. But I do think far and away, you were just very surprised with the way that Clemson was playing, with the way that they were being coached. Indecisive is a word that comes to mind, especially with some of the decisions that were being made right before half. Bizarre. Everyone looked confused, and I would be upset too and probably would have left early if I was a Clemson fan.
The broadcast put it so nicely that I had to write it down here. I don't know which one of them said it that was on the call today, and I'm sorry about that, but they said Syracuse out-coached Clemson, out-executed, and out-competed. And that's what happened. I mean, Syracuse had their way with Clemson. They did pretty much whatever they wanted in this game offensively. They did enough on defense for all that we've said about this Elijah Robinson defense. They looked pretty decent today. And now I think it brings up another set of questions. Is this a Clemson team that's a very bad team, or is this a Syracuse team that actually could be a bit better than people anticipated? And I think it's probably a mix of both.
I think it's a mix of both. And then you have the third question. Does today's performance even matter? That might be a stretch, but how reflective or how indicative is today's performance compared to the rest of the season if only Angeli cannot come back in? I don't know what the answer to that question is going to be, but I will say, going back to the game, Syracuse kicks a field goal on the drive out of halftime. It's 27-14. Then Angeli gets hurt. We sort of went through what we saw as far as that's concerned. But when Collins comes in and then immediately Syracuse goes up 34-14, that really showed me something. I'm not saying that the stats don't matter, that the numbers don't matter, because they do. But that right there to me was a moment. He came in off the bench. He had to be practicing all week. He had to have that same level of prep. He needed to stay mentally ready through every game that he's been a part of, even though he hasn't played much. And then you come in a really, really big time moment, stay completely calm, and help your team to a win.
Yeah, I think you're certainly looking at things through a different scope because of the Angeli injury. If he happens to be out for the year, I mean, I don't think you can overstate how unfortunate that is. And then you're down to Collins. And at that point, if you're down to Collins, then your backup's a freshman, right? So the depth that would affect would be significant. And I think you also just feel bad for Steve Angeli, who had finally come into his own after transferring from Notre Dame, and the whole works there. But I will say that having Rickie Collins as an option now looks like a better choice than ever from Fran Brown, his staff, and everybody involved, because they said it all the way throughout camp, and now it is ringing true. If Steve goes down, Rickie is one snap from being in the game, and we'll see how he handles that. And we will still see how he handled that. I don't think this second half showed me enough about Rickie Collins in any way, shape, or form. He had the touchdown that looked nice, but then there were plenty of 3-and-outs in there. And you are playing Clemson. So I think we'll learn more about Rickie Collins if he has to go out there next week against Duke, which at this point I would say looks pretty likely.
I agree. You know what else it made me think about? It was so important that they brought Rickie Collins in, but it was also so important that they were able to keep him and hold on to him, because it might not have went that way. So props to Collins for sticking it out, understanding that there could be an opportunity here, and then showing up when it was time to show up. I agree with you. No one is sitting at this particular table and saying that Angeli wasn't the reason that Syracuse won, at least in large part, because he was. But I do think that with Collins, I mean, it did get close there for a second. Clemson pulled, it got close again. It was 34-21 at some point, got a little bit nervous. And I think Collins was able to shut that down. There was also an interception at the end, Davian Kerr. So that was good as well. But again, I sit here questioning whether Syracuse and the defense had a great game, or Clemson beat themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so that was the moment that you knew it was kind of done, because you did have a minute there in that second half where you were like, okay, now this is a 2-score game. It could easily, there's 7 minutes left. Clemson could come back to win this game. Cade Klubnik never really had that rhythm today. He threw for like over 300 yards, threw the ball 60 times. Cade Klubnik was, I think, 37 for 60. That is
crazy.
You don't see that very often. But anyway, so there was a moment there where you were kind of like, all right, it's in reach. And then Davion Kerr had that interception, and it was kind of wraps with 5 minutes left. I do agree that, listen, you can't understate beating a team the caliber of Clemson that has, we said it before this week, there is a size disparity against Syracuse. There's a talent disparity against Syracuse that weighs in Clemson's favor. This was the number 4 team in the country ranked in the preseason. Since then, of course, unfortunate events have unfolded. They have gone 1-3, barely beat a G5 team, and have lost every other game they've played. So I think Clemson would be, without a doubt, the national disappointment of the year through the first 4 weeks of college football. However, I think you're certainly encouraged by what you saw from Syracuse today, independent of that, right? The Syracuse defense, we talked a lot about the offense. We know the offense was going to be okay, at least with Steve Angeli. The Syracuse defense, from the minute they went out there in the first quarter, they looked different to me.
Yes.
I don't know if it was just a good matchup against what Clemson was doing. The tackling was better. The aggressiveness was better. They were blitzing to kind of no avail, and that was annoying, but they pressured Klubnik enough. They did what they needed to do to win this game.
I completely agree. And I remember a time where we were sitting at this table a few weeks ago saying, if Syracuse is going to be the kind of team that goes to a bowl game, if Syracuse is going to be the kind of team that has any chance at getting 7 or so wins, the defense is going to have to improve, and it's going to have to happen quickly. I don't know that a few weeks ago I really thought that that was possible. I thought at the very least it would have taken more time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young talent, especially on the defensive end, and Syracuse ultimately found a way to figure it out today. I feel like even the one-on-one coverage was better. I just feel like play for play, Syracuse was really hanging with this Clemson team. So, like you said, we're going to have to see how Clemson fares the rest of the way. But you could say the same thing about their game against Tennessee. Was Clemson a really bad team? Was Tennessee a really good team? I think we're still going to have to see what kind of team Syracuse is throughout those next few games based on the opponents that they play. And that other big question of, is Angeli returning or not? But that remains to be seen for now.
Yeah, I think without the Angeli problem, which again we need to know more, if you're a Syracuse fan, you're encouraged by today. I think this gives you a new light to think that, okay, getting to that 6-win bowl mark, which the schedule was so challenging, that now seems much more in play if you're 3-1 through 4 weeks. Getting through, games you should win, like a Duke game or could win, a Duke game, a BC game, a Pitt game, a UNC game even, those all seem a bit more winnable now, albeit the Angeli caveat. So now I guess, yeah, you should feel encouraged by the performance you saw today, but obviously we need to know more. And I'm encouraged to see what Fran Brown has to say afterwards, which we will go look at. And I just have to say it, I am worried for those attending Dabo Swinney's press conference in Clemson, South Carolina after this game. He might be heading to the beach after this.
I was literally just going to say to you, is he going to the beach? He said he's not going to the beach. He's going somewhere else. Did this break him today? Sincerely, on the ESPN broadcast, great job by the crew in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But just all of it. I mean, they are I understand there was a rain delay, but they are showing Death Valley. People are leaving the stadium. I mean, it looked like Swinney was actually really quite emotional.
He
at
swiped
the end
at
of the
his
game.
eyes a few times.
We're not sure whether he was crying or not, but it appeared like that was a possibility. And I don't even know what to say about that. Obviously, as someone who covers Syracuse, you're happy and you feel good for Syracuse that the Orange were able to win that game. But damn, it must just feel like a lot of pressure in a place like Clemson, where football is the religion, it seems like, to just have that level of pressure, knowing that you are not living up to the standards that everyone else around you, fans, media, friends, family, all expect of you year in and year out.
And what an odd situation if you are a Clemson fan, right? Like, we don't cover Clemson, we don't claim to, but if you are, this was the year that Clemson has been building towards, right? It's Klubnik's third year as a starter. They returned, by the way, the most returning production in the country, the Clemson Tigers. Obviously then atop the ACC. Syracuse, on the other hand, returned the least amount of starters and had the least amount of returning production in the ACC. You had number one and the bottom feeder, and the bottom feeder won today. And if that doesn't describe college football, I don't really know what does. Nick Saban, last point here. Nick Saban, beforehand on game day, said about Dabo Swinney, quote, Dabo needs to look at what he needs to do in his program to be continually successful. The game has changed. You need to change with it. And that was before this. So what Nick Saban has to say now, I would love to know.
Well, my final thought that I'll leave you with, and I think is just something to consider, is Clemson was one of those teams that wanted to play this game in an old school way. Didn't want to go out into the transfer portal. Loyalty was something that really mattered. Wanted to see if they could continue to develop guys and work with what they had. Perhaps in this new era of name, image, and likeness, among other things, that strategy might just not work. So we'll have to see what everyone says, but I think it's interesting the route they took and the way it's played out. Thanks so much, as always, everyone, for joining us. Again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We will see you back here for the Duke preview next week. Have a great weekend.